Welcome everyone to the webinar Banish Organizational Churn, how to take the first step. I'm just delighted that we've got such a robust attendance. It's one of our best ever, and I'm really looking forward to sharing this information with you. The question to start with this is what is organizational churn? It obviously resonated with a large number of you in terms of seeing the promotion for the webinar and signing on for it. But I would like to start by really focusing in on what organizational churn is and why it is important in organizations. So the starting point really does need to be the strategic plan of organizations. I came across this article on the Forbes website, which really does summarize very well the research that has been going on for many years in terms of strategy. And there's no question the research is too consistent in too many parts of the world and too many different types of organizations that 70% of organizations fail to achieve their strategic goals. And my contention is that this is because of what I would call organizational churn, that it plays a large part. Of course, organizations are too complex for there to be any one driver in these things, but I would like to walk you through what I think is happening in organizations and to give you some insights into what can be done to really help managers be more effective so you can banish organization churn from your organizations. So churn then is really that wasted activity in organizations. It absorbs time, it wastes people's energy, it drains their engagement, and it really doesn't in total then produce the kinds of results that might be expected in organizations. It's things like those meetings. Why doesn't somebody just make a decision already? It's conflict where people in different parts of the organization are working at counter purposes and aren't able to figure out how to resolve the issue in a way that makes sense to both of them. It's poor communication, so the right information is not getting to the right people at the right time in the right size for them to be able to use it. It's silos in organizations when people in different parts of the organizations work in different ways and sometimes duplicate work or because of silos do work, miss out on doing work because each assumes the other is doing it. It's drift in the organization where people are doing work and making decisions and taking initiatives that are not completely consistent with the strategy, not because of any ill intent, but because they don't have a clear understanding of how their role can ultimately impact the strategy of the organization. And it's indecision. People that should be making decisions aren't making decisions and really do need to be doing it. So in summary, then we end up with a situation like this where you have a strategic plan for the organization, you've developed a great strategy, you have this wonderful, almost utopian vision for where you want to get to in the organization, and then 3, 5, 7, 10 years down the road, the result looks more like this than the original vision. So what we really want to tackle then in organizations is how to really avoid this. And it's not that organizations aren't working in this area. In the organizations I work in as a management consultant, they are running programs, they are doing training, they're trying to help people run better meetings, for example. They're running team building exercises, they're putting communications programs in place, they're running leadership training and so on. Absolutely, I mean, there is some impact of these, but typically when I talk to the heads of HR or the CEOs, the sense is that these programs don't deliver the results that they would expect for the investment that is made. Not only the investment in the training and the time of the HR people to put them in place, but the time of the managers to actually attend the training programs. So the question is, why is that? And I think the answer is grounded in the way we approach the information that we receive about our employees and about our organizations. And the source that really created the aha moment for me was when I was reading The State of the American Workplace. I only came across it earlier this year, but it was actually published in 2013. Those of you that are on many of my webinars know that I love the Gallup research simply because they're really mining the information from millions and millions of manager direct report relationships. So it's very insightful. They've also developed some excellent work in terms of employee engagement surveys. And they think of employees in three categories. You see them on the top of the screen here. Actively disengaged, which are the brown ones. So these are people that not only don't like to show up for work, when they do show up for work, they are so minimalist in the way they do their work that they're almost working in a counterproductive way to the objectives of the organization. And in the worst scenarios, and some smaller portion of that, actually are working counter to the objectives of the organization knowingly. Then on the other extreme, the brighter yellow, you have engaged employees. So these are employees that are engaged, they show up for work, they want to do well, they're really using their absolute best efforts day in and day out, and going above and beyond in order to help work get done. And then you have that group in the middle, which are not engaged. So they do come into work, they do their work, they're I guess what you would call average performers. There's good performers, but they're not really sort of going that extra mile and really bought into the mission and the vision of the organization. If you pull up this report, Gallup has much more extensive definitions of these, but they've paraphrased them. But what caught my eye when I was looking at this one is that if you look at engagement and disengagement back to year 2000, when this starts, we had engaged employees at 26% and disengaged employees at 18%. 2012, the last year that they had the data available for this study, we had 30% engaged and 18% disengaged. And I don't have access to the original data, so I can't do a trend line, but by eye, when I draw it in, it kind of looks flat to me. It doesn't look like we've made that much difference over those years. So the fundamental question here then is what's happening if organizations are measuring things that's important, and certainly the factors that we're measuring in engagement are important, and we're putting programs in place to try to resolve those issues. Why haven't we made a change? I would have expected that after more than a decade of working with this kind of data, that the trend line would look more like this, that we'd have many more engaged employees and many fewer disengaged employees, and a smaller number of employees that are not engaged. And I think what's happening is that we're really not approaching this information at the right level. We're taking the information, dealing with the information, and then trying to solve that information. So I've got two examples for you to demonstrate what I mean. The first one, and I picked communication because in any employee engagement survey I've ever seen, communication comes in as one of the things that needs improvement in the organization. So if you think of what we mean by communication, the kind of conversation that you're likely to have at a water cooler is an employee is saying to one of their colleagues that, you know, I've been working on this project for 3 weeks now. It was assigned to me then, and 2 weeks ago the senior management team made a decision, and I didn't find out about it today. So for the last 2 weeks I've been doing work that I shouldn't have been doing anymore because they really turned that project around. Boy, do we have poor communication in this organization. So the words that you're using and the ability that we have to communicate this lack of communication of a business decision is described as poor communication by the employees. And when in fact what's happened is that the manager of that employee has not been diligent in terms of realizing that this decision was going to impact on that project, right-sizing the information for that employee, and changing the delegation that had been provided to that employee in terms of the work that they needed to do. So to me, the fundamental issues that are here, the root cause is, are managers doing their job in terms of gathering the information, right-sizing it for their employees, and providing it to them in the right size chunks at the right time. The second example I give you is around collaboration or silos or cooperation in organizations. It's called different things in different surveys. And the language there is not that different from at the water cooler from the previous example. It's an employee talking to another employee. You know, I've got this report that is due tomorrow, and I'd asked finance to do an analysis for me, and they said they'd have it for me yesterday. And I really need that because I can't do the report without that analysis, and it didn't show up yesterday. So I phoned them this morning, and the finance analyst there said that something came up, and he's too busy and he's not able to get it for me. Boy, do we have poor collaboration in this organization. So again, it comes down to a question of, in this case, how does work flow across the organization? And if we're working together in an organization, what is our common understanding of how we work together, how we do handoffs together, how we will support each other in being successful in our work? I like to think about how work flows across the organization in the same way that we think of traffic in any urban center. So in an urban center, if you want traffic to be moving, you need something called traffic rules of the road, if you will. So what does a red light mean? What does a yellow light mean? What does a signal light mean? If you didn't have those things, imagine the chaos that you'd have in traffic. It's exactly the same in an organization. If you don't have, quotation marks, rules of the road for how we work together, then these kinds of miscommunications and disappointments and disconnects are going to continue to repeat themselves in organizations. So what I'm suggesting is that, in fact, most of the initiatives that are taking place in organizations today are not delivering as well as they could be expected, because what we're trying to do is treat the symptoms of churn instead of the cause of churn. And if we're treating the symptoms, it's like giving an aspirin to somebody that has a fever. You know, the fever is going to go away for a while, but if you don't treat that underlying disease, at the end of the day, the fundamental illness is going to come back. So the issue then is what is it that our employees and our managerial workforce in the organization are telling us when we're using surveys to gather information? And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that employee engagement surveys aren't good things to do. I think they are very good things to do. My point is that if communication is an issue in an organization, I would contend that putting in a communication program is not going to help solve the problem. If silos or collaboration are an issue in an organization, I would have a similar contention that doing a whole bunch of team training exercises and team development exercises or team building exercises are not going to solve the problem, because the issue is more fundamental than that. The issue is how do we work together in this organization? What are the common frameworks for doing that? I've got more to say on that, but I'll come back to it in a couple of slides. So the situation today then, in terms of the managerial workforce, is not that positive. We see that from the employee engagement in terms of the engagement of employees and in fact the active disengagement of employees. And in my career as a management consultant, I've literally talked to thousands of managers, and there is this common thread of them being delegated too much work, that they're feeling that they're under-resourced, they're feeling that their priorities are not clear. So to understand this, and to understand how we can get to root cause in organizations, I partnered with the University of Ottawa in 2013 to do a research program to understand what was happening in organizations. The first thing we wanted to do is measure what is that churn factor, if you will, in organizations. How much churn do managers feel that they're faced with? And the answer surprised even me. I thought it was going to be large, but this was a large number. So managers self-reported that they spend only 55% of their time on value-added work. So by value-added work, what I'm talking about is work that only, if it's my value-added work, it's work that only I can do in my position with my capability, with the resources that have been delegated to me. So it's that work that I've been hired to do basically in the organization, and that I've been entrusted resources to carry out. We asked this question in a slightly different way as well. We asked two questions of managers to validate this finding. One question is, how much of your time are you spent doing doing the work that you were hired to do, and how much of your time is spent doing work that could be delegated to a qualified admin assistant. In other words, how much of your time are you spent doing low-level administrative work? And if you combine those two answers, it comes out to 56%. So 44% of their time is spent in that kind of work. So coming at it two ways, we know that there's a significant gap between the resources and time available of managers to do work and what they're actually able to do in terms of effective work as managers. So think about it. If you have a workforce of 100 managers, if you could gain back that 10% of that effectiveness, it would be like adding 10 managers to your workforce. It's a tremendous waste of human resources. And this really does matter. I've got a lot of research. I did a lot of reading in this area, but there's two studies I'd like to point out to them. One is this one by Lee Branham, the 7 hidden reasons employees leave. And he in his research, 70% of employees leave for a job for reasons related to factors that are directly controllable by their managers. So managers really are, if you think about it, they're the key interface between the manager and the employee. They're the ones that delegate the work, they delegate the resources, they provide the budget within the context of their own managers, of course. They provide the feedback, the coaching, the training, the performance management, and in fact, they have a major impact on their compensation. So all of these things make the manager the most important link, and therefore one of the key factors in employees being engaged. The other is that work groups that are ineffectively managed are 50% less productive and 44% less profitable. So this again from Gallup, showing that managers really can make a difference in terms of performance. And that comes back to very fundamental research. If I polled each one of you, I would think that that if not all of you, at least 80% of you are familiar with something called the service profit chain, and that states that employee satisfaction drives customer satisfaction, drives lifetime value of a customer or revenue and profit. So if you have more satisfied employees, you will have more satisfied customers. More satisfied customers will keep coming back and will spend more, so that will drive revenue and that will increase profit. And that's been, this study was first published in Harvard Business Review in 1994. Professor Heskett teaches at Harvard and does substantive research there. And this has been replicated by research ever after. So I think it's taken as a given that the service profit chain is a real thing and these things matter. What's been forgotten, and that's why I'm putting this slide up here, what's been forgotten is that Heskett makes the case in that paper that this entire chain is underpinned by by managerial leadership practices in the organization. So really, if I were drawing this, I would draw the four related factors. So managerial leadership practices lead to employee satisfaction, lead to customer satisfaction, and lead to revenue and profit. So the fact that managers are not able to focus on their value-added work does create this churn in the organization. Because if you think about the work that managers do and what their value-added work is, I would say it falls into these 3 categories. So the first one is their day-to-day work and continuous improvement on that. I call that the job description work. So what do I come in the morning to do? This is stuff that I have to run my operation, whatever that is, and I have to think about how I can improve it continuously over time. The second part of it is projects or change initiatives. So if I'm a manager, I will be delegated stuff. It might be a project to do something, or it might be some change that's going to help drive a strategic initiative. So these are things that are delegated kind of over and above my regular job, but of course related to my skill set and the expected outcomes of my department. And then the third one, and this one often doesn't make the list, and I think it's a real shame. It's called managerial leadership. So as a manager, of course I have to do my day job, and of course I have to run my change initiatives, but I also can't take my eye off the ball of managing my subordinates. So if I'm a manager of managers, I need to manage my managers, provide them support and provide them guidance, provide them insight, set context for them, and so on. I have a whole webinar on the 5 requirements of effective managers, which I'd recommend if you're interested in finding out about more about that. So what we found in the research, to come back to that, is that the main driver of manager effectiveness is in fact accountability. So if you see this, and this is the only kind of research results I'm going to show you directly, is that accountability is extremely highly correlated with manager effectiveness. So 0.74, a correlation of 0 means there's no correlation. A correlation of 1 means it's 100% correlation. So to get a correlation of 0.74 in social sciences generally is rare. So it does show a very high coordination. So the driver of accountability really needs to be understood, the drivers that lead to accountability, but accountability itself needs to be understood. It's a word that we use, and it's a word that is distributed, is used a lot in organizations, but to me it's not always clear what, I'm sorry I'm stuttering here a little bit, I'm just noticing that there's been some sound degradation. I was just reading that. So I think we're going to be okay. So if anybody is having trouble hearing me, please do put up a text message or a question, and I'll see what we can do. But I think that matter's been resolved. So to come back to it, so then in the question of accountability, as I was doing the preparation work for the research study, I was absolutely amazed to find out that there were only a handful of researchers in the world doing research into accountability. And then even a bit more amazed to find out that in terms of those research papers, each one of those researchers defined accountability in a different way. So Professor Go and I, my collaborator at the University of Ottawa, put a definition in place, and this is one that effective managers use as we do our work and we support our clients. Accountability is an obligation for which one can be held to account for one's results and one's actions by a specified other. So there's three components here that have to be borne in mind. Number one is that it's an obligation, so I have an obligation to do something. The second is that it's my results and my actions. So just getting the job done isn't enough. It's how the job is done. And then the third is this concept of a specified other, because to be truly accountable for something, there must be someone that will hold me to account. If it's a completely internal driven feeling of something that I need to do, we use the word responsibility for that. So that's driven by inner values and desires. Accountability is used in the managerial sense to describe that relationship between a manager and a subordinate manager, or a manager and a subordinate employee, in terms of holding them to account for work. The big aha moment for me in the research is described on this slide. And what we found is that there are actually two different dimensions of accountability. One dimension is here what we would call felt accountability, and the second dimension is clarity of accountability. So in the felt accountability dimension, managers scored themselves very high. People feel accountable for doing work. In the clarity of accountability dimension, however, managers scored themselves relatively low. If it were a term paper, it would be kind of a B- or a C+, depending on the organization. So what we find is that while employees feel accountable for doing things, they're not clear about those things for which they're being held accountable. And the problem with this is that this clarity of accountability is what drives the clarity of action in organizations. If I'm clear from my manager about what I'm accountable for doing, I'm going to be more effective in making decisions and taking initiatives in terms of what those things are that I need to do. And it will drive clarity of interaction, because if my boss makes it clear to me what I'm accountable for, and my peer's boss makes it accountable to him or her what they're accountable for, then how we work collaboratively is also going to be much more clear. So the question in organizations there then is not whether people will feel accountable for doing work, people will feel accountable for doing work. That's this is part of the nature of people in terms of their employment relationship with their employer. So the question then is whether managers will feel accountable for the right things. And that's kind of a good news story, actually, because whether one feels accountable or not, as I mentioned earlier, that's more driven by a value set of how one interacts with others. So to change that kind of behavior it could be difficult. You can do it with coaching and training and support and feedback and motivation and so on. So you can have some impact there. But in terms of clarity of accountability, that's a managerial system. The CEO can put in an accountability and authority framework and put it in place in such a way that all employees can be clearer about what they are accountable for. So organizations can control this and therefore can be masters of their own destiny. The approach that we've developed for this is called the effective point of accountability, which combines the concepts of single point of accountability. So we want to ensure that there's a single point of accountability for getting stuff done in organizations, and that is as low in the organization as possible. So we want to delegate work down the organization. We want to delegate the authority that goes with that and get it as low as in the organization as possible, to the point where we can find the lowest person that has the capability and the resources to be successful at that work. And we want that because we want our organizations to be nimble and to make the best decisions with the best information possible. So that combines the single point of accountability with the lowest point of accountability, which becomes the effective point of accountability in the organization. So I diagram it in this way in terms of work flowing down the organization. If the vice president delegates work to the director does their value-added work, decides what it is that they must do in terms of their effective point of accountability, but then they will decide what they can, how they can chunk up those things that they've been delegated and delegate pieces of that down to the next layer of the organization, where that person does their value-added work, delegates work down the organization, and so on. Where it gets more complicated in organizations is the delegation of cross-functional work. Because if you look at something like this, if we're looking at Team Green there, then the manager of Team Green can be the effective point of accountability for work that flows across that green function. But the moment that you have work that flows across two different departments, say work that is a process that flows across the green workers and the gold workers, you can't have a single point of accountability by either the green manager or the gold manager, because neither one of them is the boss of, to use a technical term, is the boss of the other team. So if there's a problem in terms of a handoff between the green team and the gold team, the green team can troubleshoot and improve and direct people on their team to improve things, and the manager on gold can direct people to do things differently on their team, but neither one of them has the authority to direct people on the other team. So if the green and the gold manager can't work it out between themselves about how they will change their context for their teams, they have to escalate up to sort of the dark green manager here, who will do that. I wanted to give you just a quick example on this one because it really is critically important, and this is one of the we've got a few slides left, but this is one of the main concepts that I wanted to get to you. If we think about this organization, hypothetical organization I've put in place, we've got a CEO, we've got vice presidents, and we've got directors. So if we look at a director of finance on the left side of the organization and a director of operations on the right side of the organization, let's assume that the director of finance has a report that they need to submit to their vice president on the first Monday of each month. This is a report that gets submitted through the CEO to the board. So it's an important report. But for the director of finance to be able to do that work, they depend on data, information in terms of production from this director of operations. So the Monday morning when the director of finance is supposed to be putting this report together, the information's not there. So she picks up the phone and calls the director in operations and says, where's this information? I really need this badly because I have to get this report in by noon to my vice president. And the director of operations says, oh, I'm sorry, we had a breakdown overnight, and the vice president has told me that my number one priority is to get things back up and running, and I just don't have time to pull this information together for you. So here we have a sense of churn or conflict in the organization. For the director of finance to be successful in her work, she needs this information from the director in operations. For the director of operations to be successful in his work, he needs to respond to the directly delegated urgent work that his vice president has given him. So in this situation, and it's a simplified simplified system, a simplified example just to drive home the example, but because the two VPs have set different context and delegated differently for their two subordinates, the two of them cannot successfully resolve that, because if the director of operations gives up his work in order to meet the requirements of the director of finance, he won't get his main job done. So the only person that can reset this context is the two vice presidents. So they need, the two directors really kind of need to agree to disagree and say, we have to check with our vice president. So the vice president of finance might say to the director, oh, that's right, that is an absolutely urgent requirement, so we'll have to delay the report to next week. Or the vice president of operations might say, oh yes, that's a really critical finance report. We'll have to get some extra resources in there. Whatever the resolution might be, the two of them could agree to change it. If they can't agree, then the CEO is the only individual that would be able to make that decision, and the CEO is the one that can, and I've put the slide up here, decide and direct. So for that issue that I've just walked you through, the CEO is in fact the effective point of accountability for that cross-functional work, because the CEO is the only one that can decide and direct. I have a webinar that's entirely on the effective point of accountability, so do feel free to check out my YouTube channel if you'd like more information on that. But getting that right in terms of accountability and authority in organizations, both in terms of managerial work as work flows down the organization, and cross-functional work in terms of the rules of the road for how work flows across the organization, is critically important. So I shift then to the second part of the promise I made for the webinar is what do you do about it? Unfortunately, most organizations look like this when you come in the morning, because there's just a lot of stuff happening. So you know what your day job is, but managers are typically hit by a lot of stuff from a lot of different directions and being pulled in a lot of different ways. So getting that clarity of accountability and authority in place is really helpful, because it helps them make decisions that are consistent with the overall end game for the organization, so that they can sift their way through this. So one of the best starting points is to really understand your starting point. So one of the best ways to change a system is to really understand what that system looks like in the current place. So if we're thinking about manager effectiveness in organizations, it's really, really important in the organization that we understand how effective our managers feel they are, and what those factors are that get in the way of doing that. So this brings us to the effective manager's effectiveness audit. What we've done is used the survey tool that was developed for the research to put together an effectiveness audit tool, so that CEOs, heads of HR can directly gather information in a confidential way from managers, and find out from them what their perceptions are of effectiveness, of their own effectiveness in the organization, and the other key factors that drive that, such as role conflict, such as workflow, such as my own manager's capability, such as organization learning, and so on. The survey, which is used for the audit, is 94 question. It's web-based. Takes 20 to 30 minutes to complete. Data is secure and gathered on the fly. Multi-session response is built in, and I think the key point here is that it is confidential feedback, because it's very difficult for someone that's inside the organization to gather information that is objective and confidential and as valid as possible. There's always concern in terms of managers feeling that the information might come back to haunt them if they say that they're at X% of effectiveness. So having a third-party objective tool can be very helpful in that respect. Built into the survey is a report which provides significant information for each organization. So I just on this slide put together some of the key elements, but there's 2 points that I'd like to make about it. One point is that in terms of benchmark, it's helpful to understand what other organizations are experiencing. So that is very helpful. But I always caution about being overly dependent on benchmarks because each organization is quite unique. So depending on where you are at in your journey as an organization and what your strategy is and what your key challenges are, the benchmark may not be that relevant. So you might be doing much better than the benchmark, but it's such a critical factor in terms of success for your strategy, it might be an area that you want to focus in on. So it's important in terms of reports like this to reflect the benchmark, but also to really focus in on what some of the key issues are. Each report is also developed uniquely for each client. So it's not a computer-generated report. So in fact, I personally do the final round of analysis to understand what are the key factors and what should be the key focal points for the organization in terms of where can we leverage those strengths that we have to overcome some of the opportunities that we have for improvement in the organization, so that overall we can be successful, overall we can improve our accountability and authority framework, and overall we can reduce the churn in our organization. We've also built into the effectiveness audit a 3-hour meeting, which is a web-based meeting where I actually sit down with the CEO and the senior management team to give them feedback on the report, make sure that they understand the report, and then facilitate a decision-making process. And in doing that, my strong recommendation going in is to pick the one thing where you can have the biggest impact on reducing organizational churn and focus in on that. The temptation is to say, oh gosh, we got these 3 areas, let's get a change program in place and we're going to tackle each of these 3 areas, and then coming out the other end, things are going to be so much better. And what in fact happens is you overload your managers because they still have their day jobs to do. So you overload their managers with the change program, and the chances of succeeding on all 3 fronts at the same time are greatly reduced. And then the report also includes some suggestions in terms of a generic implementation. So the report does quantify manager effectiveness in the organizations. It builds an action plan for improvement that's grounded in science-based findings. It gauges the current state of manager effectiveness, so you know where you're starting from, what your strengths are, and what your opportunities are. It has some good information for you in terms of benchmarking. It assists in targeting manager effectiveness improvement programs by attacking root cause, and I think that's really at the heart of this entire program is what is the root cause in your organization that is causing this churn. And let's focus in, perhaps not on all of the root causes because you can't do everything at once, but let's pick that one where we can have the greatest impact. In my experience, it tends to be, and that's why I spent so much focus with you on it in this webinar, around accountability and authority frameworks. The process that we suggest using is that if there is a change program, that you start at the top of the organization, and the CEO and the vice presidents essentially sit down in a facilitated discussion, often facilitated by an external consultant, to help them have the discussion in terms of the CEO deciding how he or she will work differently going forward. Working through the expectations that the CEO will have with each of the VPs in terms of how they will work differently going forward. And then, and most importantly, working through and being
the CEO being very clear with the VPs in terms of expectations about how they will work differently with their directors and how they will pass this on. I also recommend in these kinds of change programs, because you want consistency all the way down the organization, that at the senior level meetings you train internal team members in terms of facilitating those discussions, and that they then would facilitate the VP director meetings and the director manager meetings and so on. Not to run the meetings, because the manager must be accountable for the running the meetings and the making the decisions and the delegating and the direction and so on, but to ensure that the hard questions are asked, that the difficult discussions are had, and to facilitate the decision making as it goes forward. In terms of the effectiveness audit, to those of you, I notice a number of you that are on the webinar are management consultants. So we do enter into programs where we can support the effectiveness audit tool, use the effectiveness audit tool, I'm sorry, to support you in your work with others with your clients and your client base. So I've got a few slides in summary. If anyone has any questions, now would be a good time to put them into the question box, and I can come back to those in just a couple of minutes. Just wanted to give you a heads up on a couple of things. One is that as opposed to putting together a series of webinars that are held on a regular basis going forward, we will be holding our future webinars on roughly a monthly basis, but we will be using our events list to promote the upcoming webinars in the same way that we did for this webinar. So approximately on a monthly list, you can on a monthly basis, you can expect to hear information about that. I also wanted to give you a heads up about my recently published book, The Effective CEO, The Balancing Act That Drives Sustainable Performance. I'm working on a book actually on the effective manager, because I think that's where we really need support for managers in terms of how can I be a better manager and how can I do a better job of managing my managers. But as I worked through that book and the content there, it kept coming over and over again, running into the importance of the CEO doing their job in terms of managing their own subordinates. So CEOs needing to manage the CEO, needing to ensure that the accountability and authority frameworks are in place for how work flows down the organization, how work flows across the organization. The CEO being accountable for ensuring that you have the right organization for the strategy that you're trying to implement. The CEO being accountable for ensuring that there's a talent pool system in place, that you get the right people in the right jobs with the right skills so that they're doing the right work and that managers are doing their managerial work. And then finally, that the CEOs are getting that right balance between support services, the corporate services and organizations, supporting the organization, but also providing services and support to other managers. So that is now available, and it's highly recommended reading if you're interested in understanding about these systems a bit more. Just to let you know, I have a multitude of free resources on my website. Some of the white papers that I talked about and referred to in this webinar are available there, so please do feel free to go to the resources page, download that. I'm really into giving back. What we found out about effective managers and helping managers to be effective is so powerful. I just want to get that message out as much as I can. I do client work, of course, and I support clients in providing the effectiveness survey and supporting them in change programs. I intend, though, of course, through the report for them to have enough information that they can do what they need to do internally, so it's so that they can do that. But over and above that, I do want to just get information in the hands of organizations. I mentioned earlier about my YouTube channel. You can find it by searching for my name, Dwight Mahalitz. I know that's not so easy to spell. You can search for effective managers, or you can search for any of the names of the webinar. So do check that out. I find that some managers find that what they'll do is they'll pick a topic that's of interest to their team. They, over a sort of a lunch and learn, they watch the webinar and then discuss it and how those concepts might apply within their own team. And finally, please do feel free to connect with me if you're interested in daily management tips. I do try to post regularly to Twitter. Connect with me on LinkedIn. I just love collaborating with people and being in touch with people, so would be very happy to do that. So I see two questions here. If anyone else has any other questions, please do jump in. The first question is asking about the research base. So they're asking how many organizations and types of organizations were involved in the research. The first point I'd make is that we use live managers in real organizations that were doing real work. So many studies and I'm not even sure they're actually research projects. So-called research projects come out and they're artificial environment exercises where people give reactions and then that's extrapolated into the real world. So I really wanted this to be a real world exercise, and I'm totally grateful to the 8 CEOs that agreed to participate in this. There were 213 managers, and we had a response rate of over 90%, so it was very well received. And I interviewed a number of the managers following up just to get that information. And kind of the common thing was, it's about time somebody was asking these questions, so I really enjoyed that part of it. 213 managers participated overall. Just over 2,000 manager direct report relationships, so it's substantive. 7 of the 8 organizations were Canadian, and there were a variety across sectors and a number of different sizes. And as we go forward, as more and more organizations use the effectiveness audit tool, we'll add that to the benchmark, so we'll continue to grow the benchmark as we go forward. The second question here is about the implementation coming out of a report. Oh, that's a very, very fair question, because often, and I don't blame a lot of potential clients for being nervous around these kinds of things, because if you're going to ask all of your managers questions like these, you have to be prepared to tell them what you're going to do with the answers that you receive from them. So I do recommend that if an organization is going to use a tool like the effectiveness audit tool, that they are prepared to seriously consider and to deal with and to give feedback to, and then to implement change going forward. So it's a hugely helpful change tool. But it wouldn't be something that I would just suggest that you ask just for the sake of asking the questions and finding out where you're at. So with that in mind, the survey report does have a whole section on implementation to provide guidance in terms of how one might improve the accountability and authority framework in the organization. So as part of that 3-hour meeting, we provide input and support to the organization. Now, of course, I am available, and many organizations do choose to engage me, particularly for the CEO, VP level start of the change process and help scope out the program. But my intent, even if I do that, is to provide enough service, information, materials, approaches, so that the internal team is trained and the internal team does most of the work. And then by the end of it, it's an entirely sustainable program. Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you. I really appreciate your time today. That brings us to 12:49, so we're just about 10 minutes ahead of the end time that I had said we would lock down. So that's great. As I log off, a short survey, a 3-question survey, will pop up on your screen. So if you would please take the time to give me feedback in terms of how we can improve these webinars, I would very, very much appreciate that. I will, as soon as the recording is ready from this webinar, I will be sending you a link to that so that you will have it. If there are any other materials or any other support or any other questions you have, please feel free to email me. The email is available on your login, or you can just reply when I send the link to the recorded webinar. So thank you again very much for your time. I really appreciate it, and I hope everyone has a great rest of the day. Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Dwight Mahalitz, President of Effective Managers.
Thank you so much for downloading the webinar. I hope that you enjoyed it and will find it useful. Feel free to check out other parts of the website for interesting downloads. Most are free, some are at a nominal charge, but I'm sure you'll find lots of interesting tools there and things that can help you be more effective. And in fact, that's what my job is. My job is to help you, help your organization be higher performing. The bottom line is that I want to start where you are, understand your problem, and provide services that can help you solve that problem and implement a solution as quickly and as effectively and as efficiently as possible. Give me a call, drop me an email. I'd love to hear from you, talk about your situation, and see if there's anything that we can do together. Thank you.